Some people refer to this as our textbook, and in a sense that's true. But when Bill wrote it, he just wrote as the Spirit moved him. And as a result of that, we find that there are major references to various aspects of the program and the steps, which are pretty much scattered around. So one of the things we do in this workshop is to make sure we understand how all these parts of the big book tie together. And this, chapter 3 is a good example of that. Chapter 3, more about alcoholism, is really split into two parts. Now the first part has to do with step 1 exclusively. And beginning on page 30, it describes the first step. That's the only place in the big book where this is done specifically. And you'll notice, if you turn to page 30, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's kind of important for us to get caught up here and see what this chapter is doing for us. The other aspect of the chapter, the last part of the chapter, deals with the subject of insanity and the subject of fear and the subject of self-knowledge. Now, to explain that, remember we have step 2 coming up. And the big book always builds toward the next step or toward the next idea, the next concept. And so with step 2 coming up here pretty soon, the question of insanity immediately raises its ugly head, because if you're looking at the second step and you're saying to yourself that this power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Well, what does this mean? What's this insanity business all about? I've never been committed. I've never been consigned to a rubber room or any of that stuff. Well, that's not true of all of us. Some of us that. But you try to tell me here that I'm insane and that I have to come to believe that God can restore me to sanity. Well, the big book meets that question head on. And it does so, as we shall see, with the stories of Fred and Jim and the Jaywalker. The first part of the chapter deals with step 1 directly. Second paragraph on page 30 defines step 1. It's the only place in the big book where the first step is actually defined. That we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. Now this is the first step to recovery. So now that's the first part. If you want to break the first step down into parts, that would be the first part of the first step. A concession to our innermost selves that we're alcoholics. This is not a surface thing. This doesn't mean that what we have done by coming to a meeting and saying, my name is Jim and I'm an alcoholic. That might mean everything and it might mean very little. It might even mean nothing more than that I want to be included. Or somebody has told me I have to do that, or I can't sit in the meeting. If I happen to be in one of these crazy closed meetings, I can't even stay there unless I do that, which is utter nonsense, balderdash. That's another subject. So this full concession to our innermost selves that we are alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. The second part of the first step, in spite of everything you've heard up to now, is defined in the last part of that paragraph. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. Not just ignored, not just put aside, or not just denied in some way, but smashed. Because if we don't do that, if we have reservations about somehow someday being able to drink like normal people, the first step hasn't been worked. You say, well, where in the world is all this stuff about my life become unmanageable? You want to know the truth of that? The truth of that is that appears in the third step. That's where we find out that we were trying to run our lives to suit ourselves and we're playing God, and that did not work. The fact of an unmanageable life is not proof of alcoholism. So if you knew, get that very straight. You can write for 495 questions and take 6 months to prove that your life is all screwed up, and it doesn't prove a thing, except that you're a human being. And that God has all the power, and He runs this world, this universe. When you're thinking about that particular New Age AA idea that somehow we got to convince you you're an alcoholic because your life is all screwed up, think about something that's very, very close to home. What about the Lord's Prayer that we say at every meeting? Thy will not mine be done. Thy will be done, we say to God. What do you suppose we're doing there? Are we giving Him permission? No. You see, what we're really doing is we are stating the fact that God's will is going to be done whether we like it or not. And the Big Book teaches us over and over again that He has all power, we have none. Lack of power is our dilemma. We've never been in charge. We thought at one time perhaps that we were general manager of the universe, but it wasn't so. We often thought, and I'm sure most of you have had these fantasies, if I was just in charge, man, I could straighten this whole mess out in a hurry. If we were in charge, oh my God, can you imagine the chaos that would have resulted? In any event, the first step is then defined, and then it is expanded upon this one theme, that the delusion we're like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. And it shows us clearly that we are going to have to do something right now if we expect that the first step is going to be effective. And that is, we're going to have to accept, recognize, and accept as an absolute fact that we can never safely drink alcohol in any form again the rest of our lives. The plug is in the jug. And this follows directly in line with what Dr. Silkworth told us back in his opinion. That for we chronic alcoholics, we can never safely take alcohol in any form at all. Again, for the rest of our lives, we're done. Because when we do, why? Because when we do, the phenomenon of craving kicks in and we're off on another run. So it turns out the whole key to commencing sobriety is first to come to this agreement and this acceptance that we're going to have to do whatever it takes not to take that first drink. And then we find out the bad news, that we can't stop taking that first drink because we're powerless. What do you think powerlessness means? It means precisely that we have no power to stop drinking. That's what we're going to be talking about now in the latter part of the third chapter, the insanity of that first drink. In spite of everything else to the contrary notwithstanding, everything we know about what's going to happen, all of the experiences we've had, all the degradation, all of the jails, all the DUIs, all of the loss of family, loss of income, loss of prestige, loss of reputation, loss of material things, illness, sickness. Some of us have been in near death. You would say anybody who was sane would figure out that, by golly, I better stop drinking for good and all. But you see, we are insane. And that we may have some remorse the day after or the 2 or 3 days after until we begin to feel a little bit better. But what does it mean to be powerless over alcohol? Precisely what does it mean? When your brain says drink, you say, yes, sir. No argument. No going back, no thinking about how it might have been or how it's going to be. The big book says that the memory of even a week ago, the pain, the suffering, the humiliation of even a week ago is not sufficient to keep us from taking that next drink. That's what it means to be powerless. And when you take the first step, you remember this. That's why the first step says that we are powerless over alcohol. We have no power to stop drinking on our own. And if we don't stop drinking, we're going to die. That's the dilemma, see? Now that's where AA comes in. That's where the 12 steps come in, because they are the solution. We get to hook into a process of spiritual growth which will solve that problem. As sponsors, that's our job, is to explain this to the new person. We have a solution here, and it never fails for anybody who's willing to use it. The problem is so many people refuse, or are not able, or unwilling to follow the directions in the big book. That's all it takes. And they're simple, and they're effective. They always work. Here's the key. We have to get God between us and the booze. To do that, we have to go from a place of rebellion and defiance to a place of acceptance and surrender and obedience. And we do that by working the steps. It's the only way we have in AA of getting there. We don't have any other way. You might have a church or something that says there's another way to do it. Once in a while, I guess that works. Most of the time it does. But the steps never fail. They always work. If we go about them with even half the effort we used to put in to get our next drink. If you think that's a wild statement, read Dr. Bob's story in the back of the book. He says exactly the same thing. So now, therefore, we're looking at the segue from step 1 to step 2. Now, step 1 does not require of us that we have any acknowledged belief in any higher power. There is the unspoken truth, however, that our sponsors should have helped us with, that we're going to have to get some higher power between us and the booze, or we're not going to make it, because we can't stop drinking on our own. But now the second step comes along, and it is a major move in another direction, isn't it? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It doesn't say will, does it? It says could. Restore us to sanity. And that's where so many of the new people that you work with will get hung up. What do you mean, restore to sanity? I'm not saying. Big Book says, well, we beg to differ. Now let us show you what we mean by insanity. So, when we get to page 35 in chapter 3, we're going to run into the first of the 3 examples which the Big Book uses to demonstrate this insanity. It also, in the process of doing that, demonstrates 2 more truisms that we as sponsors have to understand. First, that we are insane. That's the first truism. Second, that fear, listen to this now, fear of the consequences of the next drink will not keep us sober. At first, it can be effective to get us to make some moves in the right direction. But as a long-term prospect of recovery, fear is utterly ineffective. And so many of the New Age AA and some of the kind of, I don't know what you might call this other stuff that floats around here, is based upon the idea that if you're afraid enough of the consequences of drinking, you won't drink. That's absolute nonsense. So fear will not keep us sober, not in the long haul. It can be a motive force to get us started, and it can be very important for that. But it doesn't last. Just think about it for a second. Go back into your own drinking careers. You go out and you get totally wasted and you have all kinds of trouble, and maybe with the cops, and maybe you're waiting to have to go drop urine tomorrow with the PO, and you don't know whether you're going to go back to jail, and you've lost your job, and The old lady's walked out on you, the old man's walked out on you, and the kids are mad at you, and the dog bites you, and everything's gone to hell in the handbasket. But now you're feeling a little bit better. And most important thing is you want to forget all this crap that's coming down around your head. Now, how are you going to do that? You just go out and get wasted again. See, the idea is it doesn't matter whether you know what's going to happen or whether you're afraid of what's going to happen. You can't stop yourself because you're a chronic alcoholic. To say to you, just don't drink and go to meetings is the greatest travesty of all time around here. Probably is tantamount to pushing people in front of buses. Because what we're doing is telling them a falsehood, an untruth. We're telling them that you are a chronic alcoholic. You have a disease which is deadly and incurable and progressive. You're insane. You can't stop drinking on your own. So stop drinking. Oh, wait a minute. How in the world does that compute? Well, obviously it doesn't. If I am somehow able to convince you that on your own willpower, you can stop drinking, what have I really done? I've set you up for your next drunk, haven't I? Because inevitably it's going to happen. And third, the third truism is that self-knowledge doesn't keep us sober. Self-knowledge does not keep us sober. The story of Fred shows us that. They learned that way back in the very beginnings of this fellowship. Some of you have been around here a long time. You remember the story of Roland Hazard. That Roland had spent all that time with Dr. Young. Knew everything about himself. Spent a whole year with Dr. Young in Switzerland. Knew everything. Had complete knowledge of all the stuff that made him tick. He knew all of his emotional hot buttons. He knew all of it. In fact, Dr. Young had taken him apart and given him a whole new psyche. He came back to the States and he was absolutely certain that he would never drink again because he knew so much about himself and why he drank. Well, within a couple of months he was drunk. And all that self-knowledge had absolutely no value to him. And Dr. Young finally had to admit that there was nothing more he could do for him. He said, you're one of those chronics I can't help. If you don't have a spiritual awakening, if you don't have a complete psychic change, you're not going to make it. You're going to die. Roland came back, hooked up with the Oxford group, did their 6 steps, started carrying the message, helped out Evie. Evie helped out Bill, and Roland recovered, and he stayed recovered and was a leading light in early recovery in AA. Self-knowledge did him absolutely no good at all. Why? Because we're not talking about what we know. We're not talking here about knowledge or when they start, some of these treatment centers, you fill your sponsees' heads full of triggers. What the hell is a trigger? We don't need triggers. When the obsession compulsion to drink alcohol hits, it can hit at any time, from any direction, for any reason or no reason at all. And for us to go around saying, well, no, I know all my triggers, and besides which I have found out that I'm only as sick as my secrets, and I have to be willing to own my emotions and my feelings, and I'm entitled to my feelings, and I sat in that chair in the middle of that group for 3.5 hours and they tore me apart, so now I'm well. Balderdash. It's total nonsense. I'm not going to keep anybody sober. Because it's a spiritual problem, guys. That's what we're here for. We are spiritual guides. We're spiritual teachers. We're teaching what we've learned about a spiritual awakening and how to get there. Because it's the only solution that we have in AA. As a sponsor, that's all you have. You don't have anything else. You're not going to keep anybody sober by having them make coffee or greet people at the door. Those are nice things to do. But that's not sobriety. You're not going to keep people sober by making them stay away from old playmates and old playpens and all that crapola. I mean, if they're spiritually fit, they can do anything they want to do. We got to teach them, look, you want to be able to operate in this world as a normal person without being afraid of alcohol? Yes, I do. You got to work the steps. Have a spiritual awakening and stay spiritually fit. You can do any damn thing you want to do. And you can be anything you want to be. And there's nothing past God's power except the limitations you put on it. So let's take a look on page 35 and let's see what the story of Jim teaches us. You got the book in there? Okay. Second paragraph on page 35. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. By the way, that's the First World War, guys. And it's way back there, over there. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. Did you ever use that as an excuse? Oh, I got real nervous. Oh, man. He did no drinking until he was 35. That's amazing, isn't it? You know, it's around here, somehow or another, we usually get the idea that if you're a real alcoholic, you got to start drinking when you're 12 years old, or even earlier. Some people got a story that's incredible, you know, like, I was 3 months old and my parents were putting wine on my gums to keep me from teething or something. Boy, I liked it even then. It was better than mama's milk. And I've seen people with this 35 years, started 35 years. That's exactly how old one of the guys was that I sponsored. Never had anything substantial to drink before then, a few drinks here and there in college. He walked on the moon. When he got back from the moon, everything was great for a while. And other guys walked on the moon and they forgot about him and he started drinking. One year he was a hopeless, helpless alcoholic, wiped out. Took him seven times to get back, and 7 times in the first year. Been sober ever since, so doing great. In a few years he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled. He began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Now, that's a reference to something that we read all the way back in Bill's story. Let's turn to page 14 right now. See, all this stuff just keeps tying together. We need to know where it all is and how it works. Down at the bottom of page 14, Bill has been inspired to understand that he's going to have to carry this message to others, and he's talked to Debbie about it, and Debbie said, yeah, faith without works is dead. So Bill came to this understanding that if an alcoholic failed to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, cannot survive the certain low spots ahead. And he'll drink again. And here we go again. Back on page 35. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Wow, does that ever build up a case for fear of the consequences, or does it? See what we're talking about here, and the big book is really showing us. This guy had every reason not to drink. Every reason to be scared of what would happen if he did. He knew what was going to happen. He would lose his family, for whom he had a deep affection. Nevertheless, page 36, he got drunk again. His brain said, "Jim, time to drink." He said, "Okay." No defense. We are without defense against the first drink. We're without defense against the first drink. Why do we insist upon assuming or imagining that there is such a thing? There isn't. We ask him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I'd been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. Ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a cold stomach. I ordered the whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. By my count, it's either 3 or 4 full glasses of milk this guy's been drinking already. Holy cow. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. This thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. Now, if you want to have the lowdown on this business of fear, our knowledge being sufficient to keep us from drinking, read this last on page 36. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? Do you see what the big book's doing here? It's preparing the new person for step 2, isn't it? And it's also solidifying step 1. The step 1 is where we finally come to realize that we cannot stop drinking on our own, regardless of what anybody has told us, regardless of how many 6, 8, 10 months or a year and a half we spent in some treatment center where they tried to inculcate us with the idea that we drank because of X, Y, and Z over here, when in fact we drank because we're alcoholic. And we're crazy. And that insanity is a direct cause of our blanking out when it comes to taking that drink that could kill us. Bottom of page 36, let's remind ourselves what we're looking at. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? Now then, there's another part of the big book just a little bit ahead of us where this is all brought into focus. And we hear it every day. We need to think what it's really saying. Please turn to page 60. Okay, now the problem here is the insanity of the first drink. Why? Because if we take that first drink, the phenomenon of craving kicks in for a real alcoholic, and then we can't stop. And if we don't stop drinking, we're going to die. On page 60, we have three pertinent ideas. Let's think for a moment what they're really saying to us. A, that we were alcoholic, couldn't manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if he were sought. What's that mean? God can and will relieve us of the obsession and compulsion to drink alcohol if we seek him. How simple can it get? This whole thing that we read back here on page 36 and 37 about the insanity of that first drink. What's this telling us? That God will remove that obsession, compulsion. God will remove that insanity if we seek him. Turn to page 85. Down at the bottom of page 84, top of page 85. Bottom of page 84, we've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time, what? Sanity will have returned. We'll seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We will react sanely and normally, and we'll find that this has happened automatically. What does that mean, automatically? Go right back to the third pertinent idea. That God can and will if we seek him. When we seek God, automatically the obsession, compulsion to drink alcohol is removed. See how simple that is? Do we know any other way to have that happen? No. The way we seek God in here is through the working of the steps. Go down about 5, 6 lines, 7 lines. We feel, on page 85, we feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem's been removed. It doesn't exist for us. Wow. We've not even sworn off. Isn't that strange in a book that's supposed to be about how not to drink? Doesn't this book tell us somewhere we've got to swear off drinking? Doesn't it ever tell us that we have to stop drinking? No. Not once. Not once does it say don't drink. That's really screwy, isn't it? Why would that be? Why would this book, and go through the whole book, and it never once says don't drink? Because the book was written by people who were inspired and who were not altogether stupid. You can't have it both ways. Either we can't stop drinking or we can. If we can stop drinking, we don't need AA. If we can't stop drinking, we need AA because it's through AA in the program we're going to find God. And finding God is the solution. And it tells us that in one place very clearly. Turn to page 45, please. First full paragraph on page 45. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. Not alcohol. Lack of power. We had to find a power by which we could live. And that means as opposed to die. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously, but where and how are we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. This book isn't about not drinking. This book is about finding a power greater than ourselves. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. Now you see the emphasis of the book? Doesn't have, never once says don't drink to somebody who can't not drink. That would be crazy. It would be totally inconsistent, wouldn't it? Well, this big book is never inconsistent. It's consistent in all of its parts. And one of the things that we do in here as we study the book is try to see just how consistent it is. Because everything ties together with everything else. So it comes down to this. If you want to stop drinking for good and all, Dr. Bob said we know that we have a way for you to do that. And that this never fails. But you have to go about it with at least half of the energy you used to put into getting your next drink. It never fails, he said. Well, what is that? It's very simple. It's 12 steps which take us from a place of rebellion and defiance and denial and insanity to a place of surrender, acceptance, and obedience. And when that happens, we have a spiritual awakening. And when we have a spiritual awakening, the problem's been removed. It doesn't exist for us anymore. It's gone. I was very late in coming to this conclusion, but by the time I was 10 years sober, I knew I would never drink again. There's no doubt in my mind. Never has been since then. That was 28 years ago, and I still know that it's true. Because I knew the program worked. But most important, I knew I was going to work the program. And so it has been. Back on page 37 now. Let's move forward. We have to now get into a little allegory. The allegory of the jaywalker, which is, by the way, is very, very important for you sponsees to read and to absorb this, because it's going to be them. They're going to see themselves. You help them see themselves. Up to page 37, second full paragraph. You may think this an extreme case. To us it is not far-fetched. For this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Always. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. How much more clear can this be? Next day we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. And every one of us knows about that. In some circumstances we've gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. And the human solutionists are always telling us these terrible, awful, rotten, stinking things. Oh, you poor dear, no wonder you drank. Look what happened to you. You drank because. Let's go back and look at your dysfunctional family. Let's go back and look at the fact that you've never been able to be in touch with your feelings. Let's go back and look at the fact that you were abused. We're not quite sure how that happened, but somewhere back there you must have been abused, because that's the only solution we can see to what's happened. Somewhere you got some hazy idea of abuse, so that's got to be real. In the meantime, we can see that you are diagnosable as having a split personality, or you're a manic depressive, or you've got an absence of salt or some damn thing. So now we're going to give you all these pills. See this nice little cocktail here? We got them lined up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And don't you dare spit them out. And so what if you're walking around the halls like a damn zombie? You see, it's good for us because you don't cause any trouble that way. Keep you fully sedated and you're easy to handle. Of course you go to sleep during the group and everything, but that's okay. Besides which, if we don't medicate you, we don't get paid. Brutal. Brutal. Feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. And these people will say something like this. Oh, but of course there's justified anger. There's appropriate anger. And the big book says, you must never say that. Well, why? Why can't I say that there's appropriate anger? I mean, after all, if somebody's hurting you, you have a right to be angry, don't you? Isn't it appropriate to be angry? Well, that sounds pretty good. What's the catch? Very simple. For real alcoholics, anger is a poison. So you can well say to these people, oh, there's appropriate anger? Then I suppose you want to tell me there's appropriate strychnine. Well, no. Well, yes. Because anger kills us. The big book says these may be the dubious luxury of normal folks, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. Resentment is the #1 killer of alcoholics. Ask yourself why. Why should it be that I have to stay free of anger? The big book says if we are to live, we must be free of anger. That's live as opposed to die. Let's go back to basics. This is what you always have to do with your sponsees. Take them back to basics. Every time you get some of these things that come up, say to them, let's go back to basics. You have admitted that you're a real alcoholic. This means that you are powerless to stop drinking alcohol. It means that if you don't stop drinking alcohol because you have a deadly, incurable, progressive illness, you will die. But you can't stop. Now what's the solution? The solution is to put a loving God between you and the booze. But how are you going to do that when you're blocked off from God? What blocks me off from God? What blocks me from the sunlight of the Spirit? Anger. Fear. Resentment. For when feeling these things, we are blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit. And we drink again. And for us to drink is to die. That's what the big book tells us. See, we have to read this stuff and understand what it's really saying. We have to be consistent. If you're going to say to somebody, you're going to have to get God between you and the booze, you're going to have to teach them how to do that, and how to do that means that they got to be free of the things that block them off from God, and anger is one of those things. Maybe the worst. Maybe jealousy is a little bit worse. Jealousy, of course, is fear and anger as well. So there are no excuses justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we're obliged to admit that our justification for us free was insanely insufficient. What? In the light of what always happened. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. Now, if you've gone to a treatment center, you've seen that chart called BUD, building up to drink. It's all balderdash. It's all nonsense. We don't have to build up to drink. Damn it, don't we understand this? We're going to drink when we don't have any protection. If we're not in God's pocket, we're going to drink. If we're not seeking God, we're going to drink. It's so bloody simple. Get your sponsees on the path of seeking God and do it as fast as you can. The big book says that the second meeting, we take them to the steps. How many of you suffered with somebody sponsoring you who said, well, just get to 90 meetings, 90 days, call me every day and I'll tell you when you're ready. Or we're going to work one step a month for the next year and a half. Or some people are saying, work one step a year. Well, of course, you don't want to try to get too well by Tuesday. Why the hell not? The question is, how soon do you want to get well? How soon do you want to be set free from the obsession, compulsion to drink alcohol, which is going to kill you? How soon do you want to get into God's pocket and stay there? How soon do you want to have a spiritual awakening? Because it's the only answer we have. And as a sponsor, we got to understand this. Our job is to get people into steps just as quick as we can. Stop screwing around with it. And we can't afford to be lazy. We have to be willing to work and self-sacrifice for others to be an effective sponsor. And that means short-circuiting much of what we like to do in our own life. I was talking to a buddy of mine about buying a sailboat. Finally, he convinced me I shouldn't buy it. I said, I thought you wanted to sell it. He said, no, I do, but I'm not going to sell it to you because you'll never use it. It just happens to be the way my life is right now. And he's right. I just had a wild hair on my ass and I was thinking about getting a boat. Marilyn knows, man. I want a 50-foot Matthews anyway. A trophy blonde to go along with it. Gonna have to wait for that, I guess. Anyway, we now see that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. Period. That's the truth of it. That's why you and I as sponsors have to understand the dynamics of all of this. The only protection your sponsee is ever going to have is going to come as a result of seeking and finding and surrendering to a higher power. You can't do it, and he or she can't do it, but God can. And our job is to help our sponsees find Him. Now then, bottom page 37, we come to the jaywalker. Now this is an allegory, of course, and there's no such real person. Jim, by the way, Jim and Fred, the stories are both in this book, in this chapter, they're both real people. This guy is kind of a cartoon character, the way I see him. Our behavior is, sort of like Wile E. Coyote. Doesn't matter how many times he falls off the cliff, he gets up and tries it again. Sooner or later, it's going to be the time when he doesn't get up. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. I was just up in New York City this week, and I was thinking about the jaywalker when I was up there. Those people are nuts up there. I'm serious. They don't pay attention to red lights or any of that stuff. Crossing the middle of the street, dodging those taxi cabs, and those taxi drivers. You would think it was going to be one massive bumper car, and they don't seem to ever scrape fenders. I don't know how the hell they do it. They got to have depth perception that's uncanny. They'd make a great running back. A lot of them are wearing turbans and don't speak English, but they sure can try. I'm digressing here. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him a foolish fellow, chap. having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him. Well, the way I think about it is his peripheral vision began to fade out a little bit, and his reflexes weren't so good, and maybe his legs were starting to give out. Luck then deserts him. He's slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he's hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. Later on in the book, in the chapter The Wives, it's talking about husband number 4 and the progression of the disease. Talks about the guy who goes out and gets drunk the day he leaves the hospital. And every time we get that, there's about 10 or 15 people in the room. It's going like, yeah, that's exactly what I did. We're so screwed. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce and he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head, shuts himself up in an asylum hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? How many in here and in there too, you're not immune to all this, guys, so wake up. How many in here can identify themselves with at least a good part of the jaywalker? Put your hand. Gee, that's great. You don't have a single liar in the whole room today. Oh, that's wonderful. You may think our illustration too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer, you guys don't know what a ringer is, do you? Karen knows. There are a couple of people who know. Washing machines used to have ringers on. Yeah, Karen, they put motors on one. Yeah, they did. Yeah. You did. First you had to crank them. You had these 2 rollers. And, you know, there was no spin dry or dryers or any of that stuff. So the stuff would come out of the washing machine and you'd run it through between 2 rollers. And at first it was you had to crank it. Karen she's forgotten that they put motors on them after a while. But that was dangerous because people were always getting themselves caught. And that's the big book talks about this. You probably didn't recognize what it was saying. It says he experienced only the first nip of the ringer. And I have a kind of a salacious vision of what's going on there. But could be a finger, I guess, or something. But anyway, the first nip of the ringer is just barely getting caught between the rollers. And so, remember now, this was written in 1938, 39, so that's why. Let's see, where are we here? Well, we who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substitute alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been concerned, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? So you can see how very carefully now this chapter 3 is building the case for being restored to sanity. And it's really helpful to emphasize this with your newcomers so that they don't balk at the second step, as if it isn't for them. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms. We've not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. See, self-knowledge. Graduate from the treatment center and you're full of self-knowledge, and the theory is you'll never drink again. By the way, I'm not against treatment centers. I'm only against some of the stuff they teach. And the ones that emphasize AA have done a whole lot of good. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. We've all run to people like, maybe you're one like that yourself, or used to be. That may be true of certain, wait a minute, wait a minute, who are we talking about here? That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. And those people populate AA. They're all over the place. And that's fine. They are members and they are entitled to be members. But think about it. They don't need AA in the sense that real alcoholic does. They don't need the big book of the steps in order not to drink. Why? Because they can stop or moderate if there's sufficient reason to do so. Because they're not alcoholics. The actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. We do not stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. And the human solution is all self-knowledge. If I teach you enough about yourself and why you drink, you will stop drinking. Balderdash just doesn't matter. It's impossible, you see, guys, to talk somebody out of an insanity. And the insanity of that first drink is there, like it or not, it's there. And there's only one defense that we have against that. It's a loving God. Stand between us and the booze. Now then, this next story is the story of Fred. And Fred is a prime example of this business of self-knowledge, but he's also a really important story from another standpoint. Because Fred is a guy who did not demonstrate any of the symptomology of alcoholism that would lead one to believe that in order to be an alcoholic, you have to first prove that your life is unmanageable. Hell's bells, Fred's life wasn't unmanageable. He had under perfect control to the extent he needed to. This guy was perfectly sane in all respects, except the fact that he was a boozer. He couldn't stop drinking on his own. Everything else in his life was fine. His life wasn't unmanageable by the standards that we now see bandied about. I don't know if any of you ever answered those 495 questions that they promulgate these days to prove that your life's unmanageable, and therefore to prove you're an alcoholic. Total nonsense. That doesn't prove a damn thing. Could be up a little bit later in the third step, of course. But the third step in the big book is perfectly capable in and of itself of getting us to come to the realization we've been trying to play God. See, it isn't a question of whether your life's unmanageable, guys. It's a question of why. And the why comes back to us and our selfishness and self-centeredness and our unwillingness to surrender and our concentration on a constant basis of managing our own lives, playing God. And when we find out that it didn't work, we're faced with this decision. Either I'm going to go on trying to play God, knowing it doesn't work, or I'm going to give up. And that's what the third step is all about. Let's go on here. Now, I want you to understand that Fred is a guy who is not he's not a candidate for the bread line, he's not a candidate for the dumpster, not a candidate for living on a cardboard slab underneath the bridge. He's got money, he's got a profession, he's not lost his reputation, he's not lost his profession, he's not lost his family, but he's a drunk. Now, let's stop and think about what does that really mean? What do you have to be an alcoholic? You have two things. One, your body must not be capable of handling alcohol as a normal person body would do. Whatever the reaction may be, and there are all kinds of theories about it, the result is the same for each of us if we're an alcoholic. That we take alcohol in any form at all, and it sets off this craving that overpowers us. Once we start, we can't stop. If you don't have that, you're not an alcoholic. I don't care how much you drink. By definition, you're not an alcoholic. And a person who does not have that can modify and moderate their drinking successfully if they've got a good enough reason for doing so. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that we have this insanity. The compulsion and the obsession to drink alcohol over which we have no power. And this insanity is a direct result of spiritual weakness, spiritual bankruptcy. So now when we start talking about somebody who has everything else is going on, they are still an alcoholic. If they have the allergy to alcohol, and if they have the compulsion and obsession to drink over which they can exercise no power of their own. That's the definition, you see. Well, Fred built the definition perfectly, even though he's lost nothing else. So don't be misled by some of this stuff, because, look, you're going to find your sponsees in all stripes, sizes, shapes, and some of them be wearing their wardrobe, and some of them will be shopping on Worth Avenue. It doesn't matter. Some of them have gone as far down as you can go without cashing out altogether. Some of them have reached a point where it becomes obvious that they have no power over alcohol, that they can't stop drinking when they want to. And either way, you're talking to a real alcoholic, and they need this kind of help that we can give them, the help that comes from this big thing. Now, I think what I want to do, guys, is this. I think I want to save Fred for next week so that we can savor Fred all the way through. It's a tremendously interesting story, a true story. It teaches us a great deal, and kind of hate to break it up. Well, we see what's going to happen. Marilyn can tell you. If we started it, we'll go back to it anyway next week, won't we? And I'd like to make sure everybody's on the same page when we get into this stuff. Anyway, I want to thank you all so very much for being here. And I want to remind you that we have a 7:30 meeting here. We're not going to be crowded into this room. We have the big room. They're gracious enough to allow us to use the big room for our 7:30 meeting. And we get 80, 90, 100 people out there. That's a big book meeting. It's an hour and a half in length. And we have a meeting at 9:15, which is being well attended now, and it's a nice meeting. We concentrate on language of the heart. Get some good sharing. Really nice. I think you'd enjoy it. So we have two meetings. Come and enjoy both of them if you like, or come at 7:30 or come at 9:15. We'd love to have you. Marilyn, do we have anything? What is it next week that we're doing birthdays?
No, I think it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay.
Is it next week? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
Next? Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Just say yes or no. All right, guys. Well, let's close the meeting.
Yes.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the meeting today, and I certainly invite you to come back. Let's have a moment of silence for those who are still suffering, and then we'll say the Lord's Prayer together. And in the stairway group, we don't say anything after we say amen. Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thanks a lot for being here. See you next week. God willing, and a creek don't rise.